Okay, so this is part two of our tutorial for making Crash. And in this part, last time we added some code to init, and we saw that this code, the way that we run it, is we go all the way down here to our driver code, this code under your program, and we create a new car using this syntax. And what this does is this runs the code in the constructor in init for car. And that made a car appear on the screen, took the pen up, and then it went to 100, 100 right there. What we're going to do in the second part here is we're going to see why classes are nice. Because I think this is one of the really big leaps that we make when we jump from procedural programming to class-based programming, which is a class is a template. And the way that I reuse that template is I make a variable that I assign this variable D to the class again. And so if I run this now, you can see there were now two cars. But they did the same thing. And so remember that each car here, it's like calling init. So we can use parameters to modify the thing that the car does. So first thing you might notice is, excuse me, is that both of these cars have the shape one.gif, but we might want to have a different GIF in the car. And so inside the parameter list in init, we can have a variable that we're going to pass in when we create the new car. So it represents an unknown right now, but it could be the shape of the car. And inside shape here, we could store the name of the shape. Shape's a variable, it's a parameter, and it could contain something like one.gif or two.gif or something.gif. And then if we put self.shape and we set that shape to shape, what we're saying here is that anytime we create a car, a new car object, we're going to tell it what shape we want to use. And whatever shape we want to use, we're going to give that information to the function self.shape to actually set the shape of the car to whatever we want. And so if we see this in action, anytime we make a change to this function, init, we need to make sure that we're passing the arguments when we call it. So this car is calling init. This car is also calling init. So now I'll put two.gif. And just to prove to yourself that these are actually separate copies of everything inside the car class, we can run the code and see if we're actually going to get two different pictures. And so it's a little hard to see, but one of them had a different shape than the other one. Perhaps it's a little hard to see because they go to the same place. Maybe we can set the cars to go to a different place. And so just as we parameterize the shape here, we could parameterize this go to by passing in X and Y. So instead of going to 100, 100, we would go to X, comma, Y. And this init, the place where we're calling it, we're going to have to update our arguments because now we're passing in mystery X and mystery Y. So maybe we want to set the first car to 100, 100, and the second car, maybe we just want it to go to 10, 10. So you can see in the tooltip here, this tooltip is showing me what the arguments I need to send in init are for car right here. I need to send in the shape. I need to send in a value for X. I need to send a value in for Y. So these values inside this new object creation correspond directly to the values that are stored in these variables, in these parameters. And so we can see when I run it now, I have one car that went to 100, 100, and I have one car that went to 10, 10, which is exactly what this code does. And so this is sort of the beauty of classes, because I only wrote this code once. But because I'm allowed to make a copy of that code and parameterize it, I can have things that have substantially similar behavior reuse the same class, reuse the same template. So if I want to have 100 cars, it's just a matter of calling, of making 100 different cars, calling the constructor 100 different times with different parameters. I don't have to write that code 100 times. I just have to call a function 100 times, which I can do in a for loop or something. So this is how we would get multiple cars. And then once we have multiple cars, we might think of ways to store lots of cars. So we can make a list. And then if you want to make 5 cars, we could do like for I in range 5. So this code will run inside the for loop 5 times. Cars, this is a list.append. So we're going to add something to the end of the list. We're building a list of 5 cars. And then we'll make a temp variable here to store the car. And maybe this is maybe we can use this images list. So we'll get images of I like that. So I the first time will take the value 0, which will correspond to 1.gif. Second time it's going to correspond to 2.gif. Third time it's going to correspond to 3.gif, and so on. So each time we run this, we'll create a temp variable with a new car with a different image. And likewise, use the rand int function to get a random value, a random x value. So each parameter is separated by commas. So this randint call represents our random x value, and this random call represents a random y value. Now, it takes as arguments inside the parentheses a and b, where a is the smallest random value and b is the largest random value. So I'll say like on the x coordinate, we could go from 150, 150. And on the y coordinate, minus 150, 150. And on the y coordinate, let's just put it all at the same place. So we'll do like 300, 300, right? So it's 300 to 300. So it's always going to be 300 basically. And then we'll append cars. And because we are making cars in a loop here now, I'll comment out this code up here. But it's still making this variable temp. It's adding temp to the list. And anytime we call this is the constructor. It's going to run this code on a new copy of the car. Would you look at that? Now we made 5 cars and they went to random positions. So if we run this again, it should look different because the car's position is always random on the x coordinate. Look at that. So that's how we create multiple cars. In the next part of the tutorial, we'll look at writing forward. And after writing forward, we'll do relocate, and then we'll add the player class. So go ahead and make sure you understand this code. You should always be like coding along while we're talking, and good luck.